What if the scariest ghost wasn't hiding in the dark, but in your own silence? What if the most terrifying curse wasn't cast by magic, but by the pain we ignore in others? What if the horror that shook a whole nation wasn't just a story, but a mirror to the world we live in? This is not just another ghost story. This is a story about people, about fear, about pain that no one sees, but many feel. It is a mystery that goes deeper than the shadows, deeper than the haunted houses. This story takes you to places where silence is louder than screams, where real horror grows, not from ghosts, but from forgetting how to care. In this video, we'll walk through the cold streets of forgotten villages, hear the cries of people who were left behind, and uncover the true reasons behind the haunting. These stories may be chilling, but they are also filled with truth. They show us how real-life problems like loneliness, injustice, anger, and silence can turn into something dark if left ignored. But this video doesn't stop at fear. It brings hope. Every chapter teaches us something important that can heal, inspire, and even change how we see the world around us. From hidden pain to forgiveness, from fear to courage, we will learn how to bring light into even the darkest stories. So don't stop here. Watch until the end, and you'll understand that the most powerful ghost stories are the ones that touch the heart. And if you feel moved by what you hear, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mr. Horror AI, where horror is not just a story, it's a reflection of real life. Are you ready to listen to the silence behind the screen? Let's begin. High in the quiet hills, where the trees whispered softly and rivers moved like songs, there once stood a small mountain village. It looked peaceful, calm, and untouched. But as the sun went down each night, something changed. A soft cry would rise through the mist, gentle, broken, and filled with sadness. It wasn't a scream. It was the voice of someone weeping, just outside the homes. Yet no one opened the door. At first, people thought it was the wind. Then they said it must be an animal. But soon, children heard it too. "She's outside again," whispered one little boy. "The woman in gray, she's crying." Still, no one answered her. The village had learned to ignore sounds that made them uncomfortable. One evening, a lantern boy, a quiet child who delivered light to homes, stopped walking when he heard the voice. He followed the sound to the edge of the forest. There, under a crooked tree, sat the shadow of a woman. Her face was thin, her eyes hollow, and her lips trembled with each cry. She had no name, only sorrow. The boy didn't run. He just stood there, listening. It was then that he learned the truth. The ghost was once an old woman who lived in the village. After her husband died, she was forgotten, alone, weak, and cold. No one visited. No one noticed when she passed away in her sleep. Now her spirit cried not out of anger, but out of loneliness. Her story is not just a ghost story. It is a reflection of something real. All over the world, especially in quiet places, many elderly people are left behind. Some go days without speaking to anyone. Some die alone in their homes, and no one knows until much later. These are the real ghosts of our time, people who are alive but invisible. The lantern boy did something simple. The next day, he asked the villagers to visit the old, lonely people. Bring them food, talk to them, listen to their stories. And soon, the cries stopped. Not because the ghost was chased away, but because the village finally remembered how to care. Sometimes the loudest scream is a silent one, and sometimes the most powerful healing begins with a single act of listening. In a village not far from the mountains, a young boy disappeared without a trace. The people whispered fearfully, saying the village was cursed by a ghost, a witch spirit who took the child. Mothers held their children close, and the empty space left behind felt heavier than ever. They blamed the ghost, fearing the dark and what they could not understand. But the truth was different. Deep in an old, forgotten house lived a woman who had lost her only son many years ago. She was never able to say goodbye, never allowed to grieve with others. People avoided her, thinking she was strange or dangerous. When the boy vanished, the village turned their fear into anger, blaming her spirit for the terrible loss. The woman's ghost wasn't angry at the village. It was filled with pain. She wandered the night not to harm, but to ask one simple question. Why didn't anyone help me when I needed them? Why was I left alone in my sorrow? Her sadness became a shadow that stretched across the village, touching every heart that refused to listen. This story is more than just a ghost tale. It reminds us of the real pain carried by many grieving parents and lonely people around the world. Often their cries are quiet and their struggles hidden. Instead of support, many face judgment, silence, or blame. This makes their pain deeper and harder to heal. One day, a teacher in the village found old letters the grieving mother had written, letters full of love, hope, and unanswered questions. The teacher shared these with the village, helping them see the woman not as a curse, but as a mother who needed kindness and understanding. The village began to change. They started listening without judgment, offering help and comfort to those who grieved silently. Support groups were formed and hearts opened. The ghost's visits slowed, replaced by a peaceful calm. When we choose understanding over blame, even the heaviest grief can find light. Sometimes the darkest shadows are cast not by spirits, but by the walls we build around our pain. Healing begins when we break those walls down with simple acts of care. In a quiet village stood an old temple with a bell that rang without anyone touching it. Every night, just as the moon reached its highest point, the bell tolled softly, echoing through the empty streets. The villagers said it was a ghost, the spirit of a monk who once lived there, haunting the temple. But no one knew why the bell called out in the dark. Long ago, this monk had trusted the leaders of the temple. They promised to protect the sacred land and care for the people. But slowly, the leaders betrayed that trust. They sold parts of the temple's land to outsiders for money, ignoring the monk's warnings. The monk protested, but his voice was silenced. The truth was hidden, and the land was lost. After the monk died, the bell began to ring by itself. It was said the bell carried his pain and sorrow. Each toll was a reminder that truth had been buried under greed. The ghost wasn't there to scare the village, but to warn them about what happens when leaders forget their duty and when people stop speaking up. This story reflects many real places where corruption hides behind power. When those in charge use their position for their own gain, communities suffer. People lose faith and important values are forgotten. It is easy to feel powerless, but silence only lets injustice grow. One day, a child curious about the bell rang it in the bright daylight. At that moment, the air felt lighter, as if the monk's spirit was finally heard. The villagers began to talk openly about what had happened. They promised to be honest and brave, even when truth was hard. Slowly, the village healed, and the bell was silent once more. The bell teaches us that courage to speak out can break the darkest silence. When we face truth, no matter how painful, we bring light where shadows try to hide. Leaders who act with honesty and people who stand for what is right create a future free from fear. Sometimes the loudest calls for help come in quiet tones. Listening and acting with courage can free even the most haunted places. Deep in an ancient forest, the trees seem to whisper secrets carried by the wind. At dusk, the voices grew clearer, soft, sad, and full of longing. Locals believed the forest was haunted by the spirits of children who had gone missing many years ago. They said the children's laughter turned to whispers, and their footsteps left no trace. The forest kept their stories, but no one dared to listen. The truth was even more heartbreaking. These children had been forgotten by the world outside the trees. They were from families who struggled with poverty, loss, or hardship. Without enough care or guidance, many children wandered into the forest, hoping to escape pain. Some never returned. The forest held their memories like a silent guardian, whispering warnings to those who cared to hear. This story shows a painful truth we see everywhere. Vulnerable young people often suffer in silence. When society turns a blind eye to their needs, loneliness and fear grow. Without help, many lose their way. The silence of the community becomes a shadow over their lives, making the pain even heavier. One day, a group of villagers decided to walk through the forest, carrying lanterns and kind hearts. They called out to the lost children's spirits, promising to remember them and protect others like them. They built safe spaces for young people to learn, play, and find hope. Slowly, the whispers in the trees softened, replaced by the sounds of life and laughter. The forest teaches us a simple but powerful lesson. When we listen and act with care, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Communities that come together can light the darkest places, giving hope to those who feel lost. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest need for love. When we answer those whispers with kindness, we bring peace, not just to others, but to ourselves. The healing begins when we open our hearts to listen and care. In a small weathered house at the edge of a forgotten town, a shadow lingered. It was said to be the spirit of a person who never found peace, a soul caught between the past and the present. Every night, the shadow moved slowly through the rooms, whispering words filled with regret and sorrow. It wasn't angry or cruel. It was trapped, unable to forgive itself for mistakes long past. The house became a place people avoided. Visitors felt coldness and heaviness, a sadness they couldn't explain. The spirit carried the weight of regrets it had never faced. It was a silent reminder that when guilt grows too heavy and is left unspoken, it can trap a person in darkness. This ghost's story is not so different from what many people face today. Many suffer quietly with feelings of guilt, shame, or pain from past actions. These feelings, when left alone, can become heavy shadows inside the mind and heart. Mental health struggles often hide behind smiles, and the weight of unresolved guilt can make it hard to find peace. But there is hope. The house's story changed when someone came, not to fear, but to understand. A visitor began speaking softly to the shadow, offering forgiveness and kindness. Slowly, the heaviness lifted. The shadow no longer needed to stay trapped. The spirit was free to rest, carried away by the gentle power of acceptance. This story teaches us the power of forgiveness, not just of others, but of ourselves. Self-care is not selfish. It is a step toward healing. When we face our regrets with kindness and support, we begin to break free from the shadows that hold us back. Sometimes the hardest ghost to face is the one inside us. But with courage, forgiveness, and care, even the deepest shadows can be transformed into light. Healing is possible, and peace can be found when we choose to let go.